Hey there, Aligned You listeners, Dr. M here, and welcome to our new series called Coach's Corner. In this series, I'll be talking to some amazing coaches from around the world who all have a unique focus of how they actually help their clients. A lot of people wonder, why would they actually have a coach in their world? And we dive deeper into it in this particular series. Enjoy, and I look forward to catching you next time. I'm your host, Dr. M, and you're listening to Aligned You, a podcast designed to assist you to truly be aligned through your body, head, and heart so you can reach your full potential in your own unique way. Hey there, Aligned You listeners, Dr. M here, and welcome to this week's podcast. This week I'm super excited because I have the amazing Max Latimer. He is the next installment. Well, he isn't the installment, but he's our next guest in the installment of our Coach's Corner series. As I've mentioned before, I'm super excited to have beautiful connections all over the world with different amazing coaches, and wanted to open up why it's so important to have the right coach in your corner. Max has come from being a high school dropout to coaching and consulting over 600 business owners. Max has spent much of his life as a successful overachiever. That's a lot of S's in that particular sentence, Max. My editor will have fun getting rid of all my S's out of that. Thinking he had it all figured out, he constantly downplayed, undervalued, and disregarded his own success. He unresourcefully compared himself to the wider world, leading to inaction and fear of pursuing what he wanted. Fast forward 10 years, and he has coached, guided, and mentored Olympians, professional footballers, mums and dads, CEOs, coaches, consultants, first-time business owners, and veteran business owners alike. Now he helps overachieving, successful humans, you've stitched me up again, who are looking to recreate and realign themselves to what truly is most important to them, focusing solely on who they are in every moment. He believes that too many of us are tied down to our identity through our titles of mum, dad, business owner, professional athlete, CEO, just to name a few. He believes it's our ability and willingness to shed our labels and lean into who we are and who we choose to be in any given situation that brings true meaning, fulfillment, and purpose to our lives. Your vision and your goals for your life are not a place to get to, leading to a deferred life. They are a place to come from. Max's life philosophy is you are not what you do, you are who you are being while you do it. Thanks so much, Max. Welcome to Aligned You. A pleasure to have you on.
Dr. M, always a pleasure. I love talking to you.
Thanks, Max.
Where else would I want to be?
Good answer at this point in our conversation, Max. You're actually one of the inspirations of this series because we met through one of the businesses that you coach through, and you had reached out to me saying, I'd love to be on your podcast. And at that moment in time, Max, I think I said to you, I'm not quite sure what I would interview about. And then it was part of the inspiration of this Coach's Corner of actually speaking to a variety of different people who are coaches with different lens points, so we could see what lens point might fit our viewers. They are viewers if they're on our YouTube channel, but our Aligned You listeners, because there's a lot of talk in the modern day era, in the modern day time that we live in, about why people should have coaches. So I'd love to unpack that more with you. And let's start with that, Max. Why do you think it's important for people to have the right coach in their corner?
It's interesting. I'm not sure it's even about having the right coach, but it's about getting out of your own way. So I think it's more about identifying, do I have a problem and have I tried to solve it myself? And then once I've had a go at that, then you start to actually walk down the path of potential things that you can look for in other people. So you start to go, well, what's my vision for my life? And you go, great, that's what it is. You start to align yourself with people who also have that vision, which then unlocks the type of person that you might like to align to in order to help, say, maybe follow those people towards that vision. But I think where people get stuck is in that word coaching. I actually personally, if I can avoid it, and I've been working on this quite a bit, is that I actually want to remove the word coach out of my vernacular, because I think it gives the wrong impression in a lot of ways. I think there's an element to it where you go to a coach, they're going to give you an answer and your life will be fine. Whereas I'm far more of a proponent of not helping you get the right answer, but helping you discover what's the right answer for you on your own terms, right? So it's basically, how do you help people trust in their own inner voice rather than saying, hey, here, go and implement this. And another way in which I point towards it is that it's basically, there's codependency, and that's basically, I'm your drug dealer and you've got to come to me to get your fix in order to move in the world, versus if I can help you think clearer through your actions, through your challenges and through your problems, and make the call for yourself and test and experiment on your own terms, then you start to build that trust in your ability to be able to make a call, whether it be right or wrong, right? It's all a testing point or experiment piece. So it's basically, who do you align with in relation to where you're at? So good coach, great coach. I don't know if I exactly answered your question, but I don't think it's about coaches so much as it's about guides in your life, because I've got a stack of books behind me here, and I've never met the people that are in those books, but I found them some of the best coaches I've ever had, or the best guides in my life I've ever had. It was my ability to be able to make the call on my own terms and go, all right, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to actually implement the shit I just read. Right. And I think that's where people get stuck, and people can tend to hide behind coaching, which is the one thing that I admire the most about you, is that you went, no, I'm going to align myself with these guys because they have information to help me accelerate the thing that I already know I want to do. That was the thing that most drew me to you.
Oh, thanks, Max. I do. I appreciate that a lot. When I first joined Practice Acceleration, which is where we met, I was very drawn to you, and I think part of why I was drawn to you of all the coaches is because of your life philosophy comes through what you do. If I can offer you something, I don't mind the word coach, and I like how you termed the phrase, or how you use the phrase word, it's not a phrase, it's actually a word, Dr. M, is of guide, because I think a guide and a coach can be the same. And I think coaching has got a bad rap over the last few years because a lot of people are hoping it's going to solve all their problems. But if we took it back to a sporting environment, a coach is somebody who guides you on the field as to where you're meant to be going and how you're going to perhaps better your game and your performance. And I think that's certainly why over my adult life in particular, I've sought business coaches and different coaches in my spirituality and in my life, because it's helped guide me to who I am today at 47 years of age. And through my younger years, it was having great sporting coaches. I played lots of sports, and the people that stick out most in my mind are the great coaches that could get the best out of me. And I think that alignment piece is so very important. Before we dive more into how you help guide people, Max, I'd love to know, how did you go from dropping out of high school, which a lot of people would go, oh my God, my life is over, to actually coming into your 40th. Have you had your 40th birthday yet, or are you about to have it?
No, I had it.
Had
March.
it. That's right. I thought it had already gone.
Yeah,
I was getting my timeline muddled.
there.
You got there. You made it to 40. So how'd you leave high school, what some would have perceived as being early, to getting to 40 and having coached 600 different business owners? Tell me a little bit about that journey, because that sounds like it might have had a couple of trials or tribulations.
Yeah, the way I see it now versus back then is that I didn't have any real meaning or purpose in my life, and I didn't have anyone I was being, I don't know if you say mentored, but I didn't have any real role models, so to speak. Like, I had my parents, but they basically lent on the fact that I had interests, and then they helped support me in nurturing the interests, versus helping me get some fundamental and foundational things in my life to actually really trust where I wanted to go. So everything I did was more about how. Like, how was I going to get somewhere? And I think that's a big problem with a lot of people is that we start with how and not with who. So the hows helped me develop who I was, which was I was really good at sports. So I had the sporting side of my life nurtured my ability to be able to lead. And in any of the sporting teams that I worked in, I always became, I ended up being the captain, or, league goal scorer, or I get picked in rep teams, or I would always get elevated to a point. And so I had this leadership capability, which was great, but the school bit wasn't nurtured. So I leaned into the football, not the learning bit. It wasn't until I was 29 that I picked up a book for the first time since school. I hadn't read anything, right? I hadn't done anything. Like, I was just following the bouncing ball. Like, I had a bit of a inclination to go and work in hospitality because, like, what else was I going to do? It seemed like, okay, I'll go and give that a crack. Spent a year at TAFE doing that. and then moved to Cairns because I got an opportunity to do that at 19 and go and help open a wine bar and restaurant. And when I say help open it, I got employed at the place that was being opened. It wasn't like I helped them. I happened to be there when it was being opened. So I didn't have any skill set in doing that. And that was kind of my journey. And I spent the next 10 years in and out of hospitality, in and out of car sales. I worked as an orderly, and I was just kind of finding my way, but still pursuing football at a level 2. So soccer is what I refer to there. And I was still playing at a high level there and achieving at the local level and then sort of a little bit above that. But it was never going to do anything for me outside of just be something fun to do. And that's when I kind of started to spiral, is because I had no greater meaning or purpose in my life. There was nothing else driving me. I did have this essence of there's got to be more to life than what I'm currently experiencing. And the way in which I'd overcome that in the past was to go from one job to the next. And I would have these big ups in work, like 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, and I would love or fall in love with that thing. And then I would fall out of a love with it, and I would self-sabotage, so to speak. And then I would move on to the next one and I'd go back into the love phase again. But I was basically replacing one with another. So old became new, and then old, and then new again, and then old, and then new again. And I just kept rotating these things around. So it wasn't until I was 26, 27 that I shook it right up and went over to South America for 6 months with my partner at the time, who's now my wife. And in doing so, the prerequisite is that when we got back, I'm not going back into what I was doing before. I had to do something different. That was my only prerequisite to come back into the country, was do something different. And I think we came back into the country. I think I might have had $50 to my name. And I spent 2 weeks back home, and then I moved to Cairns where I spoke to a good mate of mine who ran a Mazda dealership. So I started to sell cars and learned how to do that. And 2.5 years that one went for before I figured out that I'm going into this spiral again. And it wasn't until years later what I realized is that I got to a glass ceiling of where I became really competent at something, and then I stopped learning. And it was that lack of awareness over that piece that I started to become entitled. I felt like I paid my dues, and I then should be being rewarded for it. And it was the world's problem, not mine. It was the world that needed to change, not me. So I wasn't taking any responsibility for my lot in life. I was for a moment, but then it would just all fall down. But I had zero awareness of this. I had no one sharing any of this insight and saying, hey, dude, there's a freaking pattern here. I was the guy calling the shots thinking I already had it figured out, because when I left at 19, I was like, if you leave home at 19, then you must have it all figured out in order to go and live on your own. Surely that's the prerequisite. That's our rites of passage, is to leave home and go out and make it on your own. But yeah, I was sorely mistaken. And it was a trip to Bali just before my 30th birthday where I made the call to go, cool, I've got to completely shift the way in which I view the world and go and figure out what I'm really made of, because I'm not getting the answer doing the same thing I've done for the past 10 or so years. So, and that's where I started to, my very first Google search to change my path was, how do I make money online? Like, that was it. I remember it vividly, like it happened yesterday. Like that's how this transition started. Like, I didn't know what to do. I was like, I wouldn't even use Google. Like, Google wasn't like, that wasn't a thing that I would use a lot of to search for things. I would just think I knew it and go and do it. Or then I'd go and smoke drugs or drink or fucking play football, like I was lost. I was so lost. But it wasn't until years later that I realized that all of that was a way for me to feel something that I couldn't find in the doing of something that was really purposeful and meaningful to me. But I didn't speak like that. I wasn't looking for purpose and meaning. Like, that wasn't the language that I was using. I was just stuck, and I was overcompensating by being the life of the party or the jokester, or always thinking I had the answers. Right, I'd always not talk over people, but I would use humor to interject and insert myself into conversations that otherwise I wouldn't have anything to share or add value with. Right, and it wasn't until I started to see these things through like guided mentorship, like 3-4 years later, that I really started to shut the fuck up and listen.
That's so powerful. Thank you for sharing that, Max, because I think there's a lot of people listening to this podcast, or they may listen to it as soon as it releases, or they might listen to it in 5 years' time, that story will send ripples through their life. Because I think there's a lot of people, when they see a coach or somebody they're listening to on a podcast, or a practitioner, or somebody they're looking up to, or they're looking to in a place of authority because they have gained expertise in a certain area, it's really easy to see the end product versus the journey that actually took you to get there. And also the bravery in going, whether it was the first trip to South America where you're like, fuck, something's got to change, or the next trip to Bali going, fuck, something really needs to change, and Mazdas are not my life. Not that there's anything wrong with Mazdas, but selling cars are not my life. Is actually really brave, and whatever was that internal fire within you that kept putting you to that next layer of awareness, whether you had the language for it or not at the time, is really powerful, and I know it will make a difference in people's lives of knowing it's okay to feel stuck. It's how long are you going to stay in the stuckedness for, and how do you get out of it? And perhaps for other people, they will also, their next Google search will be how to make money online. I'd love to know what the answer was. What was the answer, and what was then your next step after that particular search got popped in?
There were a lot of blogs. So I went through a lot of blogs. I ended up landing on one in particular. There was a guy in the States named Ramit Sethi. And he's got a blog called I Will Teach You to Be Rich, which just screams of like shonkiness. But he's actually got a documentary on Netflix now, which just got released in the last 3 or so months. Like he's the real deal. He's a superstar. But he helped me understand through one of the courses. It was the largest investment I'd ever made in myself at the time. It was $3,500. It was basically a course that he had, which was called Zero to Launch. And it was how to take an idea and then turn it into a business or a product or a blog or, your next thing. And through a period of that time, I realized that one of the things that I really needed was to learn how to start to sell myself online, which was where copywriting came into it. So I went down the copywriting rabbit hole, and that's where it all kind of started to come in from there, as I got to lean on things that I was already doing inside of hospitality or in the car sales industry, or because I was quite a people person. Like I wasn't hiding behind anything when I always put my best foot forward. Like I was a likable person. I wasn't a weird druggie on the outside. Like that wasn't a thing you saw. It was more so
you were functioning.
I was highly functioning, and I made it seem like I was doing far better than I actually was. And it wasn't die to the point where I was, depressed or anything. I just was unsure. And so copywriting became a thing, and I found this from Sethi guy, and then I found another company in the States called AWAI, which was the American Writers and Artists Inc. And they basically trained people how to become copywriters. So I probably spent between 20 and 30 grand with those guys over both traveling to America and then doing their top flight courses and sinking my teeth into that world. And it was just this level of awareness started to open up inside of me, because it wasn't just about writing. It was about the type of person you had to become when you were a writer. It was about the type of person and the mentality you had to have as you were starting to build these things out. It was never just how to make money. It was what sort of person, how do you think as a person who's going to create their own lot in life? Like that was what the essence of this thing was who do you need to become? What is the mentality? What's the mindset behind it? It wasn't just about the skill set, because the mindset drove the skill set. That was the piece that worked. A lot of the times I would just go and do because my mindset was to figure it out. So I went and did something, but then it then became something far greater and deeper than that, which was, what is the mindset driving the skill set here? And is that the right skill set that I need to be developing? Because I went to the course and I realized I need to develop the skill set a bit further. So I went into the copywriting stuff and I started to unpack that. And then I actually started to get copywriting clients through conversation. So my first copywriting client came through a conversation, because when I quit my job as a car salesperson in order to pursue, because I walked in straight after that Bali trip and I quit my job.
Oh, wow.
And my boss at the time said, fuck, you can't do that. I just quit as well. So he was a manager. He was the manager of Mazda, and he goes, "Oh, dude, no, really?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm out." And he goes, "Oh, I just resigned as well." And I'm like, "That's awesome." And he goes, "That's cool. You go first. I got more shit to take care of than you." And I was like, "Fantastic!" So I got out of there a bit quicker than he did.
I love it.
But I had to take a pay cut of about 50 grand, and we lost the carb, which was we just got a free brand new car every day to drive, which was great. But I lost that, and then I went and started working in a tour desk because I was living in Cairns. And that's where I got to practice, is that I went and found a job which was basically mind-numbingly boring. And the guy who ran the company was a really good mate of mine. And he said, "Dude, you can, as long as you're doing your job and you're selling tours, if no one's in the store, you can practice your copywriting stuff." And I was like, wicked. So I sat there and practiced like 6 months of the year in Cairns. There's no one there. Yeah. So I spent like hours at a time throughout the day at this tour desk writing copy. But the other thing that I had in my corner, which I didn't realize, was all those brochures on the wall. They all have tour reps that represented the companies that had come in and refill and replenish the tour brochures. So I got to talk to these guys on their way in, and I started to quiz them, and I actually became really, really good mates with one of the guys, and he was basically a conduit to 3 or 4 different companies, and he ran his own marketing company. And I got talking to him about what I was doing because my books would be on the desk whenever he'd come in. And to the point where he goes, "Hey, dude, you want to come and write some emails and stuff for me?" I was like, "Okay." And like we did a whole bunch of really cool shit together. He gave me my first 3 or 4 clients off the back of that. And then that turned into ad agencies and all sorts of things before I sort of started down the path of coaching, which was probably 3 or 4 years after that.
Yeah, right. There's so much gold, aligned you listeners, in what Max just shared. The first thing that I picked up with what you were talking about, Max, was when you actually first started and lent into copywriting. It was because it was stuff you were already kind of doing. And I often, with different clients that I've had over the years, or talking to in different corporate groups, or whether it's my hands-on chiropractic clients or my coaching, my performance coaching clients, is often people aren't already utilizing what's in their toolbox. They're actually trying to do something completely different, when often the skill set that you've actually been developing over many years is what's going to serve you best. What I hear a lot of is through that journey of those 10 years where you felt quite lost, is you were also developing all these amazing people skills, which have then created these amazing relationships that have then flowed onto more and more opportunities, which I really love. And the other thing I really take away from what you've spoken about there, Max, which again might be helpful for some of the Aligned You listeners, is you actually had to get a job that you didn't particularly love for a period of time, because you actually needed to support yourself while you were practicing and increasing that skill set, because you had the mindset. You needed to practice the skill set, and you needed to still feed yourself and your partner, who is now your wife at the time, and to, contribute to your household. I think often when people want to Google, how do I get rich online, they also think that means that it's going to replace their current income as soon as they hit go at it, whereas it definitely takes time. It certainly reminds me of when I opened the beautiful space that I'm sitting in at the moment, which is Mitchell Road Chiropractic, when the dear friend that did the design for me, when I'd sold my practice down the coast, and she said, "Oh, how do you bring your practice from 2-hour drive down the coast to the city of Sydney?" I said, "Well, you don't, you start again." And so I'd been very accustomed to a certain level of income for a really long time. To then actually start again was quite the shock to the system, let me tell you, because it was
absolutely
a big drop in income over the first couple of years of MRC, and still getting back to where it was, because my choice of where I wanted to be geographically was more important to me at the time than the income I was generating. And I think I know through my own personal experience, there's times where I've made those choices. Other people might have looked from outside in going, "You're nuts. You're in a highly functioning practice down the South Coast, working the hours you want to work, earning the money that gives you a very nice lifestyle. What the fuck are you doing?" But there was a bigger drive to actually have a different level of impact. So I resonate with that a lot, where I'm sure there might have been a couple of people with the WTFs to you too when you're dropping income by that level.
It's the number one thing. It's the number one thing that if I was to look at the biggest leap forwards in my life when I had the most impact, it always came after a massive step backwards. Like it had to. Like it was basically the thing that I help people understand now is that in order for you to get what you want in your life, like you're eventually going to hit that glass ceiling, right? So whatever you had done inside of your your practice up the coast, you'd hit a glass ceiling on one version, like on some level in that area, which you were no longer willing to tolerate being the end game for you. So in order to break free of that, you actually had to kill things off to make space for new to grow, right? So if you were to plant a garden and you just had a crop in there from the year before, you wouldn't just go and plant new plants in over the top of the old ones. You'd remove all the other ones. You'd till the soil, you'd add nutrients, and then you'd go again, right? So for every time I did that, so when I did the copywriting thing, I took a step backwards, and it was money. In this particular case, it was a new gig to make room for it. When I'd made the transition from copywriter to going out as, I wasn't a coach so much as I was helping someone in their business through client support and service. So it's more front of house stuff rather than writing copies for someone back of house. I had to actually leave Cairns, which was a 14-month period where myself and my wife, I lived in Brisbane, she lived in Cairns. Right.
Yeah,
so
right.
we were apart for 14 months. And not only that, she was doing a PhD. We had our house, which was too big for the two of us. We also had another place in Palm Cove, north of Cairns, which was, we were Airbnb-ing and we were running personally ourselves. We built another one next door to it at the same time, and she was lecturing at university all at the same time. As I started to get this roll on and I started to get this momentum, and I sat down with her because I wasn't looking for a job. The job found me. And it was a mate of mine, and he just said to me, he's like, dude, what do you want? And I said, what do you mean? Because I'd been just catching up with him time and time again over about 6-12-month period, and he'd seen some stuff I posted online off the back of everything that got me to where I was at that point in time with copywriting. And I said, I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, because one of the questions I asked him was, is that when I speak to you about business stuff, because he was running a successful consulting and coaching or consulting business, I said, when I speak to you about business, what do you hear? Does it sound like I know what I'm talking about, or does it sound like some bullshit, and is it just all fluff and you're just entertaining me? And at that time I was listening to a lot of Gary Vaynerchuk, and he talked a lot about awareness, and I was like, oh, I'll ask the question. And he goes, I'll never forget it. And this is one of the biggest turning points, which had me take a massive step backwards, knowing full well I'd invested better part of 30 grand, if not more, in my copywriting stuff. He said to me, he goes, dude, to be honest with you, I don't think you're a copywriter. And I was like, sorry, come again? And he goes, just hear me when I say this. He goes, I don't think you're a copywriter. He goes, what I'm not saying is that it's not that I don't think you're a good copywriter. He says, I don't think you're the kind of bloke who is stuck out the back writing copy for someone else. You're standing at the front of the room, not the back. And when he said it, it was the thing I needed to hear at the time, because this weight got lifted off my shoulders. Because even though I was pursuing something that I thought I really enjoyed and loved, there was something grindy and it was catching on me in some level. And I didn't know what it was, even to the point where I wouldn't have even been able to explore it, other than I've got to do more work. I've got to work at this harder. I've got to make it work. Because I was working for a couple of ad agencies, and I had a couple of private clients, which is great. It was paying the bills, but there was a lot of work involved in writing good copy for people. And when he said that, it lifted the weight off my shoulders, to which he then said, what do you want? I was like, go on. And he goes, well, we're looking for someone. It's not set in stone, but basically I need to know, what do you want? Why is it important? And what do you want to get out of it? And I was like, that's interesting. He goes, I'll leave it with you. Have a think about it. Flick me a note when you want to answer it. And I was just going to flick him a quick email, because it blindsided me, because I wasn't looking for anything. It's just opportunity that arose through a relationship that I'd had with a guy. Like, I went to school with him, so I'd known him for a long time, but I hadn't seen him in a long time. I'd actually unfriended him on Facebook at one point, because the stuff he was talking about was all business related. Like, it was heavy shit that it was just not in my field of vision. So I completely written him off as someone to follow. I'm like, oh man, this is just drivel. Like, what the fuck? I'm not listening to this. Like, next, unfriend.
I hope he knows that, otherwise he's about to find out.
It come back full. Yeah, like, it came back around full circle. I've told him this story too. Like, he knows that this happened. But I decided, I was like, well, I'm a copywriter. I'll write him a letter. So I wrote him a 3-page letter, and I sent it to him and his business partner. And he got back to me in a week or two, and he said, dude, we want you to come down to Brisbane and have a chat with us. So it was in they're in Fortitude Valley, and in the building that they're on, the top floor of that building is like a big restaurant. So I went and had lunch with them. I flew in the morning, had lunch with him, and then flew back out to Cairns in the afternoon. And the first thing, I'd never met his business partner, but I'd seen both of them online because they did a lot of video content, very similar to Tristan at Practice Acceleration, right? So if you could picture that, then that version, but of these guys, right? And so he was really, really big in marketing and being seen online and how they promoted themselves. They were very good at it. So it was kind of like a bit of a celebrity moment. You meet his business partner specifically, and I was like, hey, I know you. You're from the videos. Like, it was kind of like a bit of a fanboy moment. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He goes, dude, like, he shook my hand and he goes, dude, I got to say, that is the best fucking resume I have ever seen. And I was like, what? And he said, the letter you wrote. And I never, until he said it, I never considered it even to be a resume. I just told him what I felt, what I thought, answered the questions, like the most honest and real I'd ever been with anyone in my life, because I was like, I'm not looking for this, so I might as well say the thing that I know is in me to say. And that's what I said. And evidently it landed, and I ended up moving to Brisbane like 2-3, it was probably within the month actually, because they actually said January. It was October, and they said, we're going to start the 1st of January. He calls me back and says, we don't have a spot for you in January, but if you can be here in 2 weeks, you got the job. And I was like, oh, fuck. So I had that conversation on the couch with my wife, and she goes, well, this is the whole reason you got started in the first place, was to find this thing, right? And I said, yeah. So, we made the call, and they took me in at this company. I spent 14 months away from home, but the one thing that they did that I loved, and this is where you never know what's going to happen, is that they cared so much that they flew me home once a month because they didn't want my head in Cairns and not there. They wanted me to make sure that I was looking after my responsibilities back home, and also they'd fly Jackie in as well if that was the way it works. So, once a month that was always on the table for me to be able to go home, which I took full advantage of course, because it was probably the hardest part of our relationship, and that's 17 years old now. So,
yeah, right. I think there's probably a series of different episodes we could do, Max, around long distance relationships and how to make them work, and also and the importance of having the support of your partner, and that they're on the same page as you in terms of obviously her growth. If she's studying PhDs, or doing her PhD, imagine there were very long hours of study and hard work involved. And then on the other hand is also encouraging your pursuit of happiness and fulfillment. Really, it goes beyond happiness. It goes towards fulfillment and becoming the person that you want to be, which again, that's probably a whole other episode within itself. But I love, there are so many pearls throughout what Max is talking about, Aligned You listeners, in terms of the ability of showing your true self, because there was nothing to lose. And how differently would we all show up if we actually had nothing to lose in conversations? Would we show up with more authenticity? There's a word, again, a bit like coaching, that gets thrown around a lot. But what is it? Are you showing up with authenticity? And what does that mean? Showing up as your true self. Are you actually putting your heart on your sleeve, or are you holding something back in hope that it saves embarrassment or rejection or whatever that fear might be in that moment? I also love something you said, Max, in terms of the copywriting. It wasn't that you weren't good at it, probably perhaps a little bit like football. It sounds like you were very good at it, but was it something that you were able to take to the highest levels? Perhaps not, for whatever reason. And I think that comes through in different aspects. I know it has in my career path. There's certain things that I do that I know are in my genius zone. And then there's other things that I know I'm really fucking good at, but do they light me up in the same ways that other things do? Perhaps not. But it also takes time to get to a position where you can be doing that genius level for 100% of the time, and in that process, doing what you love and are good at in the meantime can be very powerful as well. I'd love to know more, Max, about what it is that you do with your coaching clients these days, or your clients you're guiding. I'm trying not to use the word coach. The clients that you're guiding. What are some of the key premises that you work through with people when it comes to figuring out who they want to be whilst they're doing life?
The first thing that I help people understand, like, my whole thing is about you're not what you do, you're who you're being while you do whatever it is that you choose to put yourself at. And it's about helping them reconnect with who they've been in the past that have actually has bared fruit for them in the past, right? So one of the things that I help people work through is that this term I've kind of coined in relation to how I help people, which is what I call life archaeology. And the reason that I like the word archaeology is that I consider an archaeologist making a find for the first time, and how excited they'd be about that find. Like, they'd be so pumped to find that dinosaur bone or discover an animal no one's ever found before. So it's the same way in which to approach going over your past. Is that if you're going to go over it, a lot of the time we go and have a look for the trauma, or that's the rhetoric, is to go and find the bad shit in order to get over it, in order to be able to move forward with the good stuff. But it's in the wins you've had in the past and being able to lean into when were you your most free? Like, when could you be yourself? When did you feel the most connected to other people, the work you did? The decisions you made, the place you lived. Like, it's not about work. Like, work is such a tiny part of our lives. Like, yes, we spend a lot of time at it and it facilitates something else, but that's just a story that we've told ourselves. It's like you and I both discovered is that in order to get anywhere, we had to make a big step backwards, which means in order to create space, in order to move forwards, right? So which creates sacrifice. Like, you've got to sacrifice something at some point. So if you've got to downsize your house in order to free up your ability to be able to move in a more freeing and light way so that you can actually create, then that's on the table, right? That's the way in which I look at it, is that nothing's ever not on the table. Is that if you've created a business that you aren't entirely in love with and you can't understand why, and the only reason why you stay in it is because of what you think others would think if you didn't do that. So much like you had the WTF moments with people going, like, you've got this successful practice. From the outside looking in, people are looking at your life going, holy shit, I'd give anything to have that thing. And it's not that you're ungrateful for that thing. It's in your ability to see a greater vision for yourself that you need to let it go. So it's because you love that thing that you're letting it go, not because you're not grateful for it, right? So you're leaning into life in this vastly different way. So if I can help people understand who were they being in the past, and they've got a direct connection to that thing, and also who are they being when they weren't at their best, obviously that's also really important. It's not to gloss over this, because it's in self-forgiveness that we make room for the ability to be able to create this new version of ourselves. The way in which I articulate it is that if you can't paint over the top of a moldy wall, because the mold's just going to come back through the wall eventually, right? So you've got to clear the wall, you've got to clean the wall back, get it back to scratch, and then paint over it so it'll actually stick, right? So you still need to go and do that work and unpack all those sticking points. But it doesn't have to be painful, and you don't have to suffer, and you don't have to go through that shit. It's just a matter of, like, what do you want your life to look like? And where are there times in life where you found that before? You do that in your past, you do that with your money, you do that with your life, your business, you do that with your relationship, you do that with your friends, you do it with your sport, you do it with your health, you do it with all these things. And then you have a look at your future. And then you ask another series of questions and you start to unpack that. And then you have a look at your current, or your present, who you're being right now in relation to where it is that you want to go. So through that process, you start to piece together this roadmap of what is it that's truly important to me, and how do I take the next step? And there's a line in that bio that you shared in the very beginning that I don't want people to miss, because this is the piece that ties it all together. And I think this is also the main reason for a lot of people's despair and lostness in their own world, is in their ability to look at their goals as a place to come from, not a place to get to. So that was a line that I heard from a coach once upon a time. His name's Rich Litvin. And he said that your ability to be able to actually achieve your goals isn't about where you get to, because you're deferring your life in the meantime, right? You don't appreciate the journey. But it's in actually, whatever your vision is, figuring out what type of person would you be when you got there, and bringing that into the present, and then becoming that person along the way to get to your goal. So by the time you get to your goal, you've become that person along the way if you aren't already that person, and then the goal is also a bonus. It was the goal that drove you to become, right? So the vision is important because it's something potentially bigger than yourself. It's not just like, I hear it all the time. It's like, I need to make more money. And it's like, for what purpose?
Mm.
Like, what do you think that money is going to enable that you can't currently access now? And I can guarantee you the money is not going to help. It's not going to help.
Well, not without knowing who you want to be, that's for sure. I think it buys people a false sense of security sometimes is what I've seen and perhaps experienced as well in my own life. I know that I love what you're talking about, Max, in terms of who being your future self to draw it in. It's how I met my wife. There's a whole other story about that. Aligned You listeners will have heard that story many, many times. And the sort of language that I use that they will have heard before is it's really becoming the target and drawing the arrows towards you and mapping that out, mapping out the steps of who am I as a person that meets my future wife? Is that the person that's drinking too much, being the person that's going out for too many long lunches, or is it the person that's eating clean and looking after myself and being healthy environment? There's a whole other long list of goes on top of that, which we don't have time to share now, but there's a lot of alignment in that. And one of the things I love with the work that I do, and I get the sense you love in the work that you do too, Max, is most of what we're talking about is universal laws. They're not new. It's how we word it might be a little differently. And that's why I think there's so much beauty in having this Coach's Corners series, Aligned You listeners, because it allows you to hear very similar messages, but from a different viewpoint, from a different level of zooming in and out. That language that Max uses might be the language that you go, oh my God, it has finally landed. Or there might have been one of our other amazing guests that have phrased it slightly differently. And it just, each time you hear it, and it might be similar, it might be super different, but it lands for you in a different way that perhaps sends your life off into a different trajectory. And sometimes it's those 1 to 3 to 5 degree shifts that we make that make the biggest difference when we are looking in a 5 to 10 to 20 to 50 year time frame. And I really love a lot of what you've shared today, Max. I really appreciate your time today. And I know that our Aligned You listeners are going to get so much out of it. And I might get him back on, folks, to talk about long distance relationships and how to make that work, because I think a lot of people, apart from a few other things that you got, pearls of wisdom that you dropped today that we can expand on more. But for today, Max, before we finish today's episode, I did pre-warn you. I hope you remembered about the top 5. I'm sure I did. If not, I'm sure that you are about to figure it out right now. Which is
we'll make it work.
If listeners are watching this on YouTube, and if you want to see the very handsome Max, by the way, if you are listening to this in audio, check out his headshot because his nickname is George Clooney. If you wanted to see the very handsome Max wiggle awkwardly in his chair, now's the time to do it as we're coming into top 5. Anyway, so top 5 is how I usually finish my podcast, Max, but today it's about you. So it's your top 5. What song is on high rotation at the moment?
It is. Let me just bring it up. It's in an album called The Code of Flowers. And the artist is Ayla Nero. If you need any of this information, I can share it with you. And the song is called Turning Awake.
Oh, okay. I'm going to check it out.
That is on
I haven't
high
heard
rotation.
It.
Yeah. It's it's got deeper meaning because of an experience I went through, which was a plant medicine experience. But that song that blew my mind. That's where it comes from.
All right. I look forward to checking it out. I actually am not familiar with it, but I will be. What are you reading at the moment, or are you a one book kind of guy? You're a multiple book kind of guy? Are you a non-reader?
No, I read a lot. At the moment, I'm reading a book by David White, and it's called Crossing the Unknown Sea. And it ties perfectly into the conversation we've had here around doing work you love, regardless of where that work is being done. And it's typically he works with corporates, but he's a poet first. So he's got a real way with words. It's a beautiful book.
Oh, I look forward to checking it out. Again, I haven't read it. That's why I like hearing other people's top 5s, because it also opens up my reading list and also my music list too. What have you been doing lately to de-stress and realign? What's your go-to to decompress?
Recently, I connected with a group. I actually went and did an 8-day vision quest, and through that I met some people who are really quite aligned to this slower way of being, which I find is the is the prerequisite to actually stopping the noise and slowing down. And it's been connecting with those guys off the back of that in some of the beautiful places they live around the northern rivers and further above. So I went out to a friend's house yesterday, and she lives in the rainforest. We sat there for 2 hours drinking chai tea and just shared stories about vision and life and next steps and all sorts of stuff. It was very enriching.
Oh, I like it. I like it a lot. Have you got a favorite quote?
I think probably the one that I can get off the top of my head is there's one by Friedrich Nietzsche, which is with a strong enough why, you can endure almost any how. So that would be the one that probably stands out the most for me.
I like that a lot. And any final thoughts for the Aligned You listeners, Max?
Probably that point I just touched on a second ago is we live in a pretty chaotic world, and there's a common rhetoric that we need to keep moving faster and quicker when we need the next thing, and we hit a goal and we move on to. There's always another do at the beginning of the end of the next goal. Like there's always something else to do, and it's actually in our ability to be able to slow down and stop despite what the world's telling you to do. And I found one of the biggest points in relation to some of the work that I've done most recently has been your connection with nature is where life starts to become really rich. But it's not just me saying go for a walk, because it's also your connection to nature. It's not mine for you, it's yours. And it's basically the synthetic world we live in, which is this money and business and drive and growth and this masculine energy versus the feminine, which is the natural way that the world just is. And I think we've forgotten that. We've forgotten the fact that we're animals, where we are nature. And if we are nature and we try to go against its way because we think we've got a better way, that's where we start to get that element of dis-ease in our own lives. So slowing down is a really good way in which to do that, whatever that means for you.
Ooh. A beautiful way to finish, Max, and it will tail end or dovetail, perhaps is the right phrase, really nicely into our next episode, which I'll be talking more about that. Ames and I just got back from 5 days of disconnecting and doing a digital detox and being up in Crescent Head and being surrounded by nature. And we've spoken about it before and aligned you about that we are nature and that we are all interconnected. So it is hopefully not new to the Aligned You listeners. And if it is, they're about to hear more about it in the next coming episode. So Max, thank you so much for being on Aligned You today. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom and your stories and a bit more about your history, which, as I said earlier, Aligned You listeners, I know that it will create ripple effects through many of your lives, and perhaps for just even if it's for one of you that goes, oh, great, now I can get onto the path that I'm meant to be on, then it is worth recording every day of the week if that is the case. Thanks so much, Max. And that is it for this week. You're most welcome. That is it for this week, Aligned You listeners. Bye for now, and I'll catch you next time.
And that's it for today's episode, Aligned You listeners. Remember to hit the 5-star ratings and share today's episode with your friends. And be sure to join our collective on Facebook and Instagram at Aligned You. Look forward to catching you next time. The information shared on Aligned You podcast is of general nature and for information purposes only. It is not specific medical or personal advice. You should seek assistance from your healthcare practitioner for your individual circumstances. Any information provided doesn't imply endorsement or third-party devices or products and cannot provide you with health and medical advice.